900 jobs were lost when the bakery chain collapsed in 2019. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 1 point at 75.25. The pound will buy $1.24 and €1.16. LBC weather, rain moving in from the west in the north tonight, mostly dry in the south, with rain reaching Wales later on, and a low of 9 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Tim Daly.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. On our panel tonight, we have Dale Vince, the founder of Ecotricity, the world's first green energy company. Is major donor to the Labour Party and Just Stop Oil. And, even more excitingly, he owns a football club, Forest Green Rovers. I might ask him a little bit about that and indulge myself a bit. Nimco Ali is a veteran of the programme. She runs the anti-FGM charity, the Five Foundation. Vicky Ford, not sure she's a veteran. You've been on a couple of times, haven't you, Vicky? Only once?
Yeah.
How disgraceful.
That's your invitation, Iain, darling.
Blame it on Corey. Conservative MP for Chelmsford and former Foreign Office Minister. And Barry Gardiner, who is indeed a great veteran of the programme, great friend of the programme, Labour MP for Brent North and former Shadow International Trade Secretary. The number to call if you'd like to put a question to them, 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850. You can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and an increasing number of you are doing that. And of course you can watch us on Global Player. Now there are lots of subjects you might want to phone in about tonight. Tobias Ellwood quitting as Defence Select Committee chair over his Taliban video. Rishi Sunak has gone a bit flaky on the pensions triple lock. We've been talking about that on the programme already. And Labour has U-turned over supporting loosening of river pollution rules, which would allow more house building. So lots to get our teeth into tonight, but you can phone in on anything you like.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first caller. It's Hassan in Westminster. Hassan, what would you like to ask?
Hi, has Tobias Ellwood been cancelled by snowflake Tory MPs for daring to challenge the dominant narrative that the Taliban are unidimensionally evil?
Well, Tobias Ellwood, he has been the chair of the Defence Select Committee for a couple of years, and during the summer he shared a video of a visit he made to Afghanistan in which he appeared to praise the Taliban. Now, Vicky and Barry, you're both members of a different Select Committee. Select Committees have members from different political parties, but they do have a Tory majority, and certainly in most of them, if not all. Vicky, let's come to you first as a colleague of Tobias Ellwood's. Do you think he should have resigned?
Well, first of all, in answer to the question, the Taliban are evil. And what they're doing, especially to women and girls, is just so evil. The stories I've had from Afghan women who are in contact with women there who have suffering extreme violence in some cases, girls not allowed to go to school, women not allowed to work, women therefore not being able to get access to medical care. Deep, deep evil. And Tobias's video that seemed to suggest that everything was fine in Kabul and the Taliban were doing a good job is just so misleading and not supporting the population, especially the women and girls who are facing this huge suffering. I do think Select Committees do an important job, and it's really important, especially on the Defence Select Committee, that the members of the military know that the Defence Committee is truly in touch with the way they're feeling as well.
But part of Tobias' shtick is that he's an ex-member of the military.
And there are many ex-members of the military there. And I suspect that particular video would have also been extremely distressing to many people who served in Afghanistan. It will have had a Conservative majority, but that includes the chair. So I suspect when you took the chair out not voting, it would have been more 50-50.
I think there was probably still a majority for the government. Yeah.
But to say after that we need a new chair of the Defence Select Committee that can pull us all together at this really important time for defence. Is something that I think that members will have thought hard about, but that will have been a very considered decision by them, and I can understand why.
I'm not sure it was a decision by them. It was actually a vote of confidence.
Evil.
So it seems to me as though he's resigned rather than having been resigned.
Well, he may not have felt that he had the confidence.
Yeah. Barry?
Look, I agree with everything Vicky said about the Taliban and Afghanistan. I have over 500 families in my constituency who are from Afghanistan. I spent the summer when it happened, the pullout, excruciatingly dealing with it, holding special surgeries where we had all those families coming in, and it went on literally from 8:30 in the morning to, actually not just 8:30 at night, that was the first Friday. The second Friday, we actually went from 9:30 to 10 to 11 at night, and that was 5 of us in the first one, 10 of us in the second one. And it was unbelievable, and I'm still dealing with families and the fallout from it. I think what people often don't understand about select committees is that very often there is cross-party working. If the select committee is a good select committee, it will try and get some sort of camaraderie to make sure that the scrutiny of government is real, because it's important that you get the value of the select committee is in the report that it presents to government, and the fact that the government then it's obliged to respond to the recommendations in that report. So it's actually quite a powerful tool for scrutinising government, but it completely fails if the select committee is split. And that's why we always try and work to get some sort of consensus in that report. It's very rare that there'll be a minority report. I think what is clear is that Tobias Ellwood felt that he had lost the confidence of the committee, and therefore felt that he was not in a position as chair to keep that group together. And therefore, I think he did the right thing to resign.
Dale and Nimco, you're not parliamentarians, but I'm sure you might have a view on this. Dale, let's come to you first.
I missed that piece of news, and it sounds like he did the right thing, doesn't it? I hear what Barry says about committees. It sounds important that there's balance and cohesion and that kind of stuff. And look, the Taliban do bad things to women. It's as simple as that. Other regimes too, Saudi Arabia, but we let them buy Premier League football clubs. What's happening in the US right now about reproduction rights? We can be quite selective in the West about who we point the finger at and who we don't.
Okay, Nimco?
I don't think, I think evil is such a kind of a cushy kind of soft word. What the Taliban are criminals, and they're committing crimes against humanity, specifically women. I think Tobias's words were misjudged, and I've always known him to be someone that's considerate and understands international development and these kind of conversations. So it's fair that he's resigned, but I hope he takes time and actually works with women's organisations and really understands that when you talk about Afghanistan, it is not just about peace and putting the weapons down, but it's about the rights of women and girls that are kind of going on. So yeah.
Aidan in Liverpool says, I served in Afghanistan. Tobias was 100% right. Anyone who was over there agrees that the Taliban brings stability and security more than the Karzai gangsters did. I suppose that's the same as saying, well, Hitler brought stability to the Third Reich.
Yeah, this is what I mean. The whole point is it is not about a military operation. It's about a humanitarian operation. It's about the basic rights of women and girls who actually are even scared that they might get stopped about breathing soon because they're not able to work, they're not able to go outside, they're not able to be educated. So we are actually undermining the fact that these women have basic rights which they're being denied.
If I may, Iain, one of my constituents emailed me. His family had been trapped in Afghanistan under Operation Pitting. You'll remember the bomb went off and that last plane was not able to go out. They had been invited to go on that last plane. He emailed me a few months ago and sent me a photograph of his 15-year-old daughter who had committed suicide because she was so terrified of being taken by the Taliban and raped. That is the level of human suffering and pain.
But according to Aidan, that's stability.
No, that is not stability. It's human rights abuse, and it's particularly virulent in that so often in war, sex is used as a weapon, against women, and the brutalisation of women is used as a weapon in war. And you have to understand that what's going on in Afghanistan is brutal.
And of course,
That girl, she would have been raped. She would have then been put into a forced child marriage where she would have then been raped and raped and raped again. And those are the stories which we keep being told.
and part of the problem here, I think, Nimco, is that because it's so difficult for journalists and reporters, and particularly broadcast journalists, to make films and documentaries in Afghanistan at the moment, it doesn't get up the news agenda as much as it probably ought to.
No, I'm sorry to say it's not necessarily the fact that we don't have the information because the stats are there. It's because that these are women of colour. And I think one of the things that really still sticks with me is the fact that we cared more about cats and dogs getting them out of Afghanistan than we did about women who were basically murdered afterwards. So the reality is a lot of white men who are in the army think that peace and stability means that men have put the guns down as opposed to women living in a stable society. So it is not about the fact that we don't know that these women are being abused because the UN have consistently...
We know it, but we don't necessarily have the pictures. And
no, we don't have the pictures.
If you don't have pictures in the media, or if you're in the visual media, you don't get on screen.
I don't think the media wants to publish them. It's not, honestly, it is not a conversation about the fact that people don't have iPhones and you can't get images out, because we're getting images out of whether it's Lebanon or other kind of places that things are happening. It's just the fact that people are not really interested about the basic human rights of women of colour.
So I'm not going to say that Tobias doesn't care about women's rights and that he doesn't care about women in Afghanistan, because I know he cares about women's rights. I first met him many, many years ago in Rwanda, helping to build an orphanage for children. You were there, I remember. But I do think that when you've got that position of committee chair, you have a great responsibility to make sure that your language and your communications are well thought through. And his communication about what he saw was not well thought through, and it won't have had the confidence. And Barry's absolutely right about cross-party work on committees. We were laughing about it just today, how much we agree on many different issues, and you've got to have that confidence. So I hope a new committee chair will be appointed soon that will have the confidence to continue the really important scrutiny work of that committee.
Hassan, thank you for your question. We'll come to a very different one in just a moment. It's coming up to 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
With me in the studio, Barry Gardiner, Labour MP, Vicky Ford, Conservative MP, Nimco Ali, who's not an MP, but she chairs the Five Foundation, and the founder of Ecotricity, Dale Vince. Before we get on to the next question, I mentioned earlier, Dale, you own Forest Green Rovers Football Club. Most people think that anyone who buys a football club must be sort of a little bit mad, because it's very rare that people can make a lot of money from it. Why did you do it?
I didn't buy it. There was a rescue mission, and I did that because the club is 120 years old, a really important part of its local community, which is in my backyard, and I'm a football fan. And they said to me, quite frankly, it would go bust if I didn't step in, and I didn't want to, but I thought, how hard can it be, right? So I stepped in.
How hard can it be? Have you actually enjoyed it, though?
Yeah, big time. First couple of years were really difficult, I'd say. There was a lot to change, a lot to learn. The club didn't follow, the values of my company, Ecotricity. But a few years later, if you just fast forward, we're reckoned by the UN to be the greenest football club in the world. We're vegan. We've had kind of great coverage for the environment issues that we pursue. We're carbon neutral as a football club. We've teamed up with the United Nations, who created a program called Sport for Climate Action. I'm an ambassador for that scheme, and we've reached the whole world of sport, actually, just from a rescue mission of our local football club. So, yeah.
I was listening to a podcast called The Price of Football. You should appear on it as a guest. It'd be fascinating. And they were talking about all the things that you've just... And you could almost hear all the listeners thinking, well, that's a bit different. Aren't many others doing that? I mean, you obviously love to be an innovator and sort of be first to do something. Is that what sort of kicks you on?
It's not actually my choice to be first. I just find myself doing that. Like, Ecotricity was the world's first green energy company. I built, Britain's first electric car. I do the things that I believe in. It just happens that I do them before anybody else, mostly, not always. We started an electric airline about a month ago, world's first.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
You would have to pay me a lot of money to go on an electric plane. How does that work?
It'll be powered by hydrogen through a fuel cell, so there's no burning of the gas, and basically it'll have electric motors driving propellers instead of kerosene.
Are you going to be on the first flight?
I reckon I will. I have to.
Oh, you have to, don't you? Right, let's go on to another question. It is from Peter in Tottenham. Hello, Peter. Oh, no, it's a text question. Silly presenter. Peter asks, should pensioners regret voting Tory now that they're coming after them, as they were always going to? Nimco.
No, I think we had this conversation, I've been having this conversation the other day. It's the fact that I think this idea of the fact that there has to be a protected group within any political kind of space is kind of like a fallacy. But then at the same time as well, with this whole thing of where we're pitting people against each other, it's not a right thing. And I think in the next election, I'm sorry to say, but I don't think it's going to come down to pensioners. I think the millennials, the ones who are squeezed in the middle, are going to be the kind of main people to be able to support. So I think, and also I'm assuming that a lot of pensioners are right-minded, so they're just going to vote for whoever their local MP is, as opposed to this tribal politics of Tories have the home buyers and pensioners, and the Labour have the students and the renters kind of rubbish that keeps going around.
Is it rubbish, though?
I think it is.
I mean, older people tend to vote Tory, and they vote, whereas younger people tend not to vote Tory, and a lot of them don't vote. I mean, that's a generalisation, but you look at the figures and it's borne out as the truth.
I know, but I think that's when there was actually, for example, the last election, that you could say that there was a distinct difference between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party in terms of Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson kind of conversation. But I think in the next election, when Labour moves to the centre, and I think with the Conservatives hopefully getting rid of a lot of their kind of Brexit right-wing nuttery, I think it's going to be kind of down the middle, and I think it's going to have to be about the young, well, not necessarily young, but the old millennials like myself who are in our late 30s and early 40s.
Okay. Barry Gardiner.
I think there's so many reasons for those pensioners to regret voting Tory that this is just the latest in a long list. Look at the promises on social care.
Let's look at the promise on pensions.
No, absolutely. Look at the promise on pensions. Pensioners. Not all pensioners are poor, but many poor people are pensioners. And if you are struggling, and you have been promised that you are going to see your pension rise in line with wages, and the government says, no, we've changed our mind on that.
Which, to be fair, they haven't.
No, but that's the rumour that's going around, that they're going to change it, and it will make a marginal difference to wealthy pensioners, but it could make a material difference to pensioners who are poor and relying on the state pension.
So Labour's position is what?
I have no idea whether Labour has actually even pronounced on it.
Well, shall I educate you on that one?
Please.
Angela Rayner actually announced yesterday at the TUC that Labour, she wouldn't commit herself to the triple lock. So there is no promise from Labour coming that they are going to maintain it after the next election.
Yeah, well, but the point is surely that when it comes to an election, you make your promises, and then you should be judged on those promises. And the Conservatives made a promise. If they break it, they should be judged to have broken it, and that will lose them support.
So Keir Starmer should
not yet.
Starmer should therefore be judged on all the promises that he has broken after he was elected leader. Literally, virtually every single one that he made in the leadership campaign, he's now broken.
Yes, that was not to the wider electorate at a general election, as you,
that's all right,
as you know. No, I don't think it is, and I would have my own beef about certain of those promises that have not been kept. But that's the point that I'm making, is to try and respond to Peter's point, where he said, should pensioners be concerned or upset and learn the lesson, that actually the promise that was made to them appears to be going to be broken. Now, it hasn't yet, but if it is, as I say, you make your promise before the election. Now, it's quite fair for Angela Rayner to say, we will make our promises before the election, and we'll make it when we know what the state of the economy is like, and then judge us on how we keep those promises. But at the moment, I think Peter's right, judge the Conservatives by whether they've kept their promises or not. And on many, many, many things, as they say, social care is just one of them, they haven't.
OK. Dale?
I thought you made a good point there about the voting intentions of different demographics, older people versus young people. And I just wanted to say this next election is being gerrymandered by the Tory government, who have introduced a new law to make it much harder for young people to vote than it is for older people to vote. So if you're a pensioner, you can take along your bus card or travel card as ID, and you can vote. If you're a student, you cannot.
Which, I mean, it's slightly veering off the subject, but Vicky, that does seem to be very unfair, doesn't it?
So the rationale for that is to get the older person's travel card, you've had to produce ID to get that travel card, whereas to get the student card, you don't need to prove, verify who you are. It's a lower level of verification. So this verification for voters, that's why there's a different type of ID. Because you've already had to show your passport or driver's licence to prove that you got your bus pass. That's my understanding. On the issue of the triple lock...
I did.
Come to you in a second.
I did, thank you. Just one thing, actually. This week I read there was, it may have been another select committee, Robert Buckland, I think, was leading it. He was the architect of these reforms of election law. And he admitted basically the Tories had got it wrong, because they brought in this change in the law off the back of 3 cases of fraud over the last 7 years. And in the last by-election, 14,000 younger people that were not white were not able to vote. 14,000 people in one by-election, and that shows you what they've achieved in terms of gerrymandering.
That wasn't actually the question that you were supposed to be answering, though, if you don't mind me saying so. The question was, should pensioners regret voting Tory now that they're coming after them as they were always going to?
The simple answer is they haven't come after them yet, have they? But Barry's right, there's a whole lot of other reasons to regret voting.
OK, Vicky.
So, first of all, we have kept the promise. It was the Conservatives who introduced the triple lock. We introduced it in 2010. We've kept it every year since.
No, you haven't. There was 1 year that we didn't in COVID.
There was a year when there was a statistical issue with how inflation was being calculated during the COVID period due to that, and therefore it was done over a 2-year period, not the 1-year period. But we have kept it. The Prime Minister is very clear it's been kept. Now, at this time, we are keeping that promise. Furthermore, we've introduced other protections for pensioners and for those on low income as well, putting money, especially to those into lower incomes, that move to do the triple lock, another move to support those on lower income, has meant that there's 200,000 fewer pensioners in poverty than there were back in 2010. I treat my pensioners extremely seriously as a vulnerable group, especially those on low income. We've been talking about how we make sure they get supported through this winter as well, Barry and I just today. Keeping your promises is really important, and what we have seen by Labour is again and again this flip-flopping. They've done it again today, a promise they made 3 weeks ago when they said they would support the new government measures to help unlock more new homes for the millennials who are now in their 30s and 40s. They flip-flopped on that just today. What I would say, and I think the Prime Minister's right here, is we're a year away from a general election, and I'm an economist and a mathematician as well. I like to look at the numbers and make all of your policies, if you can, looking at them in the round. So being pressurised to come up with general election promises a year ahead of a general election is something I can understand saying, stand back on it. But will we put pensioners absolutely at the forefront and others?
No, if you were doing that, you would give a commitment now and say, I, Vicky Ford, as an MP, if the government
I've stood in the last two general elections.
We're not going to do this, I would fight it.
So I want to make sure that pensioners have got decent quality of life, decent support from the government. That's why we introduced the pensions triple lock in 2010, a Conservative policy, a Conservative-led policy that we've continued to support throughout.
So that indicates to me, without you actually saying it, that you would support the continuation of the triple lock, all other things being equal.
I think there's another good point in that one of the other things the Conservatives did was introduce in-work pensions, so that people who are becoming pensioners now and in the future will have had more of their own pension, not state pension.
Not what I asked you.
So I can understand wanting to think about how are we supporting different cohorts of pensions, but I want to see support for pensions. And I believe.
So when I put it last night to your colleague Robert Buckland, who was sat in that seat that you're sitting in now, or was he the other? I can't remember. He agreed with me that it would be electoral suicide for the Conservatives to abandon the triple lock before the next election.
I want to make sure there's proper support for pensions, and it's been Conservative policy since 2010 that we do that through the triple lock.
Can I raise a point of order? Is it possible to commit suicide when you're already a dead man walking?
Well, there's a philosophical one for us all to contemplate.
On the man who banks Just Stop Oil and stops a lot of people going to work and going to jobs and being able to get ambulances to hospital, I think you have a lot to answer for.
Carry on, bring it.
Well,
that
may come up in the next half an hour as well. So let's not go into that right now. We are going to go to the LBC News headlines. It's coming up to 8:30. Let's get them from Tim Daly.
3 people believed to be relatives of Sarah Sharif have been arrested on suspicion of murder more than a month after she was found dead in Woking. 2 men and a woman are being held by Surrey police. Tobias Ellwood has confirmed his resignation as chair of the Defence Select Committee. He was facing a vote of confidence after making comments online which appeared to praise the Taliban in Afghanistan. And the range is expected to agree a deal to buy Wilko's brand for around £5 million. The sale could mean the name won't disappear from high streets for good. LBC weather, rain moving in from the west in the north tonight, mostly dry in the south, with rain reaching Wales later on as well, and a low of 9 degrees.
Weekdays from 7am.
Hi, I'm the Keir Starmer of radio.
Straight to the point.
If they're prepared to shoot each other to get on a boat, I don't know if they want them coming to this country.
Uncompromising.
They're incompetent.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
I've done a complete U-turn on this.
Listen on your radio and on Global Player. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:33 on LBC. Andy says, Iain, you're so boring and boring looking. Not much I can do about my looks, I'm afraid. I can zhuzh my shirt. I've got a nice yellow shirt on. Does that not zhuzh me up a bit? I don't know. We have Dale Vince with us, Nimco, Ali, Vicky Ford and Barry Gardiner. Let's go to another text question from Tom in Wakefield. Now Labour has chosen EU pollution rules over proper house building. Are they becoming the political wing of Extinction Rebellion? Well, that's a good way to put a question, I suppose. Now, Labour peers are tonight voting against the government's plans to scrap anti-pollution laws, which originally became law through the EU after the now former Shadow Housing Secretary Lisa Nandy indicated only last week that Labour would support the changes. The government says ditching the rules around river pollution would enable an extra 100,000 homes to be built each year. Barry Gardiner, another U-turn.
Well, look, I don't think it makes a great deal of sense to say that you've got to choose between building more and more affordable accommodation for people, which is desperately needed, and actually having an environment that is not polluted. I think what you've got to do is you've got to make sure that you safeguard our river system. I mean, the amount of complaints from the public about sewage outflows, sewage into our rivers.
To be fair, this isn't about sewage. This is about
sewage.
No, but it's about pollution. It's about pollution of our waterways and of our system. And we should not have to choose between housing people in decent accommodation and actually having a society that is more polluted. There are ways of squaring that circle, and they should be done.
And the government was introduced. You asked me to intervene on others, so I'm going to intervene on others. Okay, so what we do need more houses. We do need more houses, especially for affordable houses. I understand that, especially for young people. I understand that. I also saw a very clunky EU law that was saying the way to protect your rivers is to not build houses. Now, we need to protect our rivers as well. But what the government has come up with is a package to say when you build new houses, you also put in other mitigation measures to make sure you don't get those nutrients. And I hope that Dale agrees with me that we need to stop polluting the rivers and therefore we need to stop the nutrients. And lots of clever solutions, like working with agriculture to reduce the slurry runoff, working to set up wetlands in one project that's going to absorb the nutrients, other ways to do it, that they were saying you can achieve the nutrient neutrality and have houses that people really do need. And for the Labour Party to have said last week and the week before, we're fine with this, and then suddenly said tonight, no, we're going to whip our members to go against it, just shows that you can't trust them not to keep flip-flopping. So I want clean rivers, but I also want more houses. And I was pleased to see a package that many supporters on the environmental side were saying they would support, and now I believe this is just the Labour Party playing games, and it's playing games that will mean young people especially can't get houses.
On the contrary, I would say that it's actually the government trying to bend over backwards, as always, for the developers. Look,
why did Lisa Nandy support them then?
You talked about slurry runoff. Slurry runoff has got absolutely nothing to do with the pollution coming from building properties. What happens when you construct properties nowadays? Developers do not connect up the surface water and the foul water sewers correctly very often. The damage that is coming from the new build should be accommodated. And you know very well, Vicky, that actually there is supposed to be a 10% biodiversity gain from every new development in the country under the government's own legislation. So how can it be that you have a 10% biodiversity gain that developers are supposed to be doing, and at the same time what you're doing is you're saying actually they're allowed to pollute more? That doesn't make sense. When you look at the whole
river, the biggest pollution is of nutrients is agricultural systems. So this is coupled with saying, how do you try and clean rivers
Fine.
from those.
We can go into the minute detail of it, but the question remains is, how does the Labour Party change its position when Lisa Nandy, the former Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, presumably having been convinced that the government's arguments were right on this, was supporting them, and now the new Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Angela Rayner, has done a volte-face. I mean, whether she's become an expert within a week, I somehow doubt, but anyway, Dale.
Firstly, I don't think we should make this political, but then secondly, I want to say...
Well, that's the question from the listener.
I meant in our answers, there's a Tory majority in the House of Lords, so why is this a Labour issue? And next thing I want to say is, this is just another broken promise, actually.
There isn't a Tory majority
we were promised as part of the Brexit bundle of promises that there wouldn't be a weakening of environment law. And this is what exactly this is a weakening of law. Now, I thought I'd seen that it was 100,000 houses by 2050, not 100,000 per year, because we only build 150,000 a year now, so it's not a doubling of that. And if you look at that, it's making 4,000 homes a year difference. The actual cost that house builders were having to bear to meet these standards was very small, and I don't think it was a difference between building or not. House builders sat on massive land banks that they're not developing. We have a housing crisis in this country for those reasons, and house builders are major Tory donors who just got a big bung last week, £160 million a year to house builders from this weakening of environment regulations.
Nimco.
I'm not really familiar with the story, but I think in the sense of the fact that I think with Michael Gove as the Communities and Housing Secretary, and I think if Lisa Nandy did agree with him before, I think this is a thought out kind of policy. So, but I do think in terms of this conversation between whether we want houses or whether we want better environment, I think we can't play that game. It's the fact that I say that as somebody, we have to be able to make sure that the fact that we are able to live in a sustainable world. Yep. Where we're able to have young children that are not dying from asthma attacks because of the air pollution, or people that are not going into rivers that are full of sewage.
And the net biodiversity gain is really important in that. And Dale, there's 100,000 homes, as I understand it, in 74 council areas who've currently got planning permission but couldn't build because of this rule. So it is houses that would be ready to be built right now. They've got the planning permission. So it is a real issue. But Nimco, I agree with you. It's not an either or. My point is that you can do both, but not necessarily in the way the very clunky EU law was doing it.
So you will have read the headlines, particularly in the Daily Mail, about Labour turning into Extinction Rebellion, largely because you donate to both. I mean, this kind of volte-face by Labour might play into that narrative. Are you not a little bit anxious about that?
I just want to say the numbers don't stack up for me first. Right, 100,000 homes, 160 million was what the government compensated the Environment Agency with instead of having house builders do this. It's just over £1,000 a house. Is that really stopping builders building homes with an average selling price of £200,000 or more? I don't think so. Your question, sorry. Extinction Rebellion, our Labour, the political wing demo. Come on, it's a male narrative, isn't it?
It is a male narrative, but incidents like this might play into it.
Well, I think they will for the right-wing media, which dominates, obviously, the media in our country. But this is basically a broken promise. We were promised, coming out of Brexit, we wouldn't have weaker environment regulations, and it's happening now across the board.
Do you accept that the regulations are being weakened after Brexit?
I think when you look at the whole package, changing this law actually can help you to still deliver what we need. You have to look at the whole package of environment. The Minister made that very clear at the dispatch box earlier this week. The things that we've done, like the net biodiversity net gain of 10% more, is way ahead of what the EU is doing. So I think there are some ways that we need, having sat in the European Parliament and seen that sometimes those laws take a one-size-fits-all approach, fitting 27 different countries at that time, and we would have done it in a different way. And I think we shouldn't just say that everything that was done in Europe has to be done in the same way as
Vicky,
the EU law says.
I should have mentioned you were an MEP.
And campaign remain, but I do think we should take the flexibility.
Okay. But Vicky, you know that we are the most biodiversity depleted country in the developed world, right? And
where'd you get that from?
From all the UN statistics, from the Global Planetary Footprint Report, from WWF. It is, we are the, and the government's own documents actually say it. So we are the most biodiversity depleted country in the world. We have lost 70% of our biodiversity in this country over the past 100 years. And it is simply not good enough for us to continue down that path. And I have always, and you know this, I have always welcomed the things that the government have done, like the biodiversity net gain, to actually address that problem. But we're not going far enough. We're not going fast enough. We need to do much more. And therefore, this was a retrograde step to actually lose those controls on pollution.
Dale?
And it's just one example. I was reading in the news this week there are 36 chemicals banned in farming in Europe that we have allowed to continue to be used in our country. They're listed as dangerous to human health and or lethal to bees, for example, the neonics. 36 chemicals that we're allowing in farming. We were promised that we wouldn't weaken EU standard regulations in the environment. I mean, that was a very clear promise. It's been broken everywhere we look. We're the dirty man of Europe once more, which we were before we went into
just,
Europe.
Dale, not true.
It is
If
true.
you come
Read the
to my
news.
constituency,
Read the news.
come to my constituency,
I'd rather read the news.
where I have. So it is not. We really need to be concerned about biodiversity. But if you look at what that biodiversity net gain is doing, Barry, I've been out with environmentalists, with bird watchers, ornithologists, local experts, and the planners of where they're planning to put some new houses. And literally, because of that law, we were able to go with the local environmentalists and say, planners, this is where the barnyard hunts. Can you make sure that that area is protected and enhanced? This is where the water voles play, and they're going to build an extra space to allow them to do that. They were not doing this before.
They've been doing that for
They
decades.
have to do this because it's now set in law.
Sorry,
they have to have
Vicky,
the biodiversity
sorry,
net gain.
you misunderstand, because what you've given examples of are protections which are already in place.
No.
Sorry, excuse me. What we're talking about is net gain.
Exactly.
Keeping a barn owl on its flight path is not a net gain.
So it was
Keeping
going to
the
be
water voles in that place is not net gain.
for more. Okay, enhanced more.
You
okay.
didn't say that.
In the walk that I did, the powers to enhance for more. How do we get
Okay.
more of the barn?
Let's move on from
more
water
of
voles.
the water voles,
Shall we?
more of the protected species.
Shall we?
Is what the law is
we
doing.
should.
Corey's
Sorry.
getting his
I think we
argument.
should. There's so much more to discuss. It's 8:45.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:48 on LBC. Mike in Harrogate is a very unhappy person. It says, as ever, former Tory candidate Dale, that's me, not you, Dale Vince, allows Conservative MP to spout a narrative that is a tissue of lies without any challenge. The way this programme works, Mike, is that I leave it to the other panellists to challenge somebody if they think that they're talking rubbish or whatever. And if they don't challenge them, then I do. But I think you'll agree in the last quarter that Dale and Barry challenged Vicky quite a lot. Would you agree with that, Vicky?
Yeah.
Did you feel you needed more challenge from me?
It's fine, Ian.
Thank you very much. Right, let's go on to another question from Barry in Catford. Why won't campaigners like Dale, that's Dale Vince, not Iain Dale, and the climate scientists accept that some of us just don't want to be forced to give up that sweet-tasting bacon for some alternative supposedly made from plants which tastes utterly naff? Now, a report in a scientific journal today said swapping half of meat and milk products for plant-based alternatives over the next 30 years could have a significant impact on preventing major climate change. Do you have any sympathy for Barry?
Well, first... no, I'm going to say no. A quick answer, no. And nobody's forcing anybody to give up bacon, as far as I understand. I mean, if I was Prime Minister, I might have a go at that, but I'm not. Fact is, it's not just the climate crisis that animal agriculture is driving. It's like the second biggest cause globally. It's the human health crisis as well. Eating this stuff, animal products, that's the major cause of the chronic illnesses that affect us in later life. Heart problems, cancers, diabetes, and these are not curable. You just live with the effects of them, and so they destroy the quality of life of millions of people. They cost the health service tens of millions of pounds a year, billions of pounds a year, in fact. And of course, animal agriculture also is the cause of the wildlife crisis. This global extinction of wildlife that we're suffering, the UK one that Barry mentioned earlier, the cause of that is animal agriculture. Oxford University put out a study about 3 years ago. They said if the UK went plant-based for our food, we would free up 75% of farmland. Now, that's half our entire country.
For what?
Whatever we wanted, giving it back to wildlife, I say, right? And that shows you how inefficient it is to grow plants, to feed animals, to feed people. When we do that, we poison the atmosphere, we poison our bodies, and we deplete the world of wildlife. So an animal diet makes no sense to me.
Nimco?
I find this kind of conversation with the environmentalists in this kind of side of the world is led actually quite irritating, because it's a bunch of privileged white men talking about animals and talking about plant-based conversations. I think in order for us to be able to actually say...
Sorry, because we're white men, are we excluded from the discussion?
No. I said the way that you talk about it. I never said the fact that you talk about it. So like on next week on Tuesday, I'm going to go to the UN at the General Assembly. And the General Assembly, there are going to be, again, Indigenous women who have been there every single year for the last 10 years that I've been going. So these conversations and the way that we're thinking of taking it seriously, people gluing themselves and doing all these things, are conversations that have been said by Indigenous First Nation people for years and years. So ultimately, I don't really care whether you eat bacon or you don't eat bacon, but the fact that we're not investing on the people who can actually save this planet, who most of those are in the global north, is actually quite problematic. So I think the whole point, the fact that we're talking about should we eat bacon, I don't really care, but should we be investing in the sense that we should be giving African women access to sustainable energy? Should we be giving them access to employment? Should we be allowing them to have as many children as they want, when they want? And all these are the kind of broader conversations. I think those are the kind of key things that I really want to talk about, as opposed to whether we want to eat bacon or not, I think. And I don't eat bacon because I'm a Muslim, so...
That would figure.
So I'm just saying. So I don't really care about the bacon question.
Do you have a secret hankering after it?
No, I don't actually, and it's I think maybe that's a psychosomatic thing, but I do ultimately understand the fact that, like, I was in East Africa recently, and everybody eats organic and eats local, and I think those are the kind of conversations that we should be talking about. I think it's the mass consumerism is the problem, as opposed to eating the meat.
But it's the mass consumption of meat that is the problem, because to grow, there's 1 billion animals a year in our country reared and killed just to feed this meat habit, which has grown since the end of the Second World War. We didn't have it before we industrialised agriculture. We have to grow them in sheds. We have to use vast amounts of land to grow the plants that we could eat, to feed the animals, to feed ourselves, with diminishing returns. In the case of a cow, we put 10 times more in than we get back out. It's a mad diet that we have.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that. I think one of the things I'm really bringing out, and which is this whole thing, and I said, and I say this as a campaigner, is the way that you go on about having this conversation. It's a very kind of like, tutting and telling people what to do as opposed to really explaining things. I'm sure Ethiopians, other kind of East African communities have lived on a non-meat diet
That's
for years
a really
and years.
good point.
So it's basic. No, but I'm saying it's the way that we have the conversation. I think it's this whole, and this is what I meant by the white male privilege kind of conversation, is the fact that I'm really not interested in this idea of the fact that I'm going to not work and just protest every single day, rather than really listening and actually engaging people who are consuming meat, who consume it because of poverty and things.
Is it a fair criticism, do you think, that sometimes people on the sort of environmentalist side of the debate are often a bit too preachy, and it's sort of, well, we know best. You little people, you should do what we say because we know better than you. Rather than trying to take people along with them, it gets a bit too preachy.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are stereotypes all around us, aren't there? You mentioned a couple there, talking about people gluing themselves to things, and you talk about preachy environmentalists, but not all environmentalists are preachy. If you just strip away all of that stuff and you look at the science and the facts, like if you do with the climate crisis, it's undeniable, it's unarguable. We eat more meat and animal products now than we ever did by a vast amount, and it is depleting the world of wildlife, it is driving the climate crisis, and it is driving the human health crisis that we're facing. And that's unarguable. Strip away the preaching and just look at the facts.
Right, I'm going to suggest that we move on to another question, and I think it's kind of all been said by our two colleagues.
No, I don't think it has.
Well, I do, and I'm in charge.
Freedom and choice.
I do, and I'm in
bringing
charge.
people with you.
One man's meat is every man's poison.
Let's go on to Sean in Concert. Hello, Sean.
How are you doing, everybody? I tell you what it is, hey, right? You're talking rubbish about bacon, right? We've got more things to worry about, right, in this country, right? North Korea is now backing Russia. Are we got to be worried, this country and the West? That's more important than talking about blinking bacon. Do you know that?
OK, well, that's why we've got you on the programme, Sean. Should we be worried about a North Korea-Russia alliance? Now, Kim Jong-un has met with Vladimir Putin in the past few hours, and it's believed Russia is keen to buy artillery shells from North Korea to then use in Ukraine. Barry?
Yes, we should. Look, there are more things to worry about in the world than bacon. I would certainly say that when you have Vladimir Putin cozying up to someone like President Kim Jong-il, that is...
decades out of date.
Sorry, that was his dad, sorry. That was, that is a dangerous situation to be in, because we've seen what North Korea have done only in the very recent past in terms of the missiles that they've fired. And so, of course we should be worried about that. On the bacon thing, I think what Nimco was saying is, look, most people in the world don't have the chance to eat bacon. Yeah. Most people in the world, or a great many of them, billions of them, are living on less than $2 a day. And actually, they get most of their GDP from their environment. And that is why the environmental destruction that is going on is so important. And that's why, I'm delighted that there are people in Extinction Rebellion and other places who are really concerned about this. And I don't mind that they take themselves or glue themselves to places. The suffragettes did that. The suffragettes chained themselves to railings.
The suffragettes were fighting for a completely different thing.
Can we get back to the subject?
It was a different thing, but it's about legitimate protest.
Yeah, we're on North Korea and Russia at the moment, not the suffragettes.
Well, there's no legitimate protest there.
Our diets are driving the climate crisis that's affecting those people that live on $2.
We've only got a couple of minutes
left. They're on the front line of that.
We've got a couple of minutes left, Vicky.
I think we should be very worried about this. I'm sure I wasn't the only person who was looking at Google Maps yesterday morning and saying, where is the border between North Korea and Russia? And the fact there is the physical...
And you're a former Foreign Office
minister. Yeah, exactly.
You should have
known. I didn't cover that part of the world, but, look, they're right. They are neighbours in a weird bit of geography, and they're now neighbours potentially in this very evil alliance.
Surely this indicates how desperate Putin is, that he has to go to Kim Jong-un for shells.
It does. He goes going to North Korea for shells, going to Iran, another evil nation, for their drones, which have caused so
evil
much damage.
Not Not evil nation.
Sorry, evil government, regime, I should have said. Not evil people at all. They've been deeply persecuted, especially the women again. But it's another reason why it is so important that the UK keeps standing up for freedom against oppression. And we do need to keep reminding people that we are a country that stands up for freedom. That's why we are standing up for the people in Ukraine. We need to work with other freedom-loving democracies and freedom-loving people. And that is why we should be very wary of telling people what to do. We need to do a journey towards changing the way we live to the environment, but we need to do that in a way that brings people with us.
We tell North Korea what to do.
And not others.
We tell lots of countries what to do.
So?
Bacon will kill you first is my answer.
Oh my gosh,
Right.
he's obsessed.
What did you say?
Bacon will kill you first.
It won't be King Jong-un's missiles that kill us or harm us. It'll be bacon. Carry on eating bacon.
I think a nuclear
See what happens.
program in North Korea
Would actually-
is very scary.
They already have
This is
it.
what I mean about
But
the
they already have it.
disillusion
No, they have it already. Come on.
of people that are in environmental kind of sectors. They have no idea what's going on in the rest of the world. And it's very much narrowly focused at the fact that bacon is more dangerous than the North Koreans.
Okay.
I think we should be worried, and I think this is a conversation.
That's a light-hearted comment, and you shouldn't assume that I don't know what's happening in the.
No, but I'm not saying. But the whole point is that you're saying that bacon's going to kill us before nuclear
It
weapons.
was a light-hearted comment.
I know. Well, it's not a light-hearted
Well,
conversation.
let's have a
Some of us
light-hearted
have lived
comment
through Civil War.
for our final fun text question of the week. It's from Sarah in Lincoln. American newspaper USA Today is currently hiring a Taylor Swift reporter whose job will be to follow what she's up to and her cultural impact. If you could have a similar job following one particular public figure, who would it be? It's basically asking who you want to stalk, I think. Barry?
I'd want to do it probably starting about 50 years ago, but I'd want to do it with David Attenborough.
Oh,
Ooh,
good answer.
It's a very worthy answer.
You'd go to all great places.
I just think it would be to follow that man's life and the way in which he has changed our perception, not just of our planet and biodiversity, but of who we are and what our place is in the creation.
And Dale is now thinking, why didn't I think of that?
Nah, it's too worthy. It's not my style.
Go on.
King Kim Jong-un.
Oh, now that would be fascinating. I've always wanted to go to North Korea. Nimco?
I think Winnie Mandela. I think there's a lot of women. Yeah, there's a lot of women who are misrepresented by, by history, and I'd love to see what her kind of role was in terms of the freedom fighting that she did for the African nations.
Well, that was one I wasn't expecting. Vicky?
I'm going to feel so. I would like to go and follow the Princess of Wales, actually. I'm really interested in how the next generation of royals are bringing a more modern conversation, the work that she's been doing for families and children, the work that he's been doing on the environment with his prize. But I say that, but I really don't want to have to stalk them because I think they get too much stalking already and there's too much stalking that goes on in life. So, yeah, and I liked her haircut this morning, so maybe I'm just...
How shallow. What's a shallow way to
I'm
end the
just
programme?
very shallow, but I just think it's a really,
Okay, well,
interesting.
thank you
I'm a
to
royalist.
all of you. Barry Gardiner, Vicky Ford, Nimco Ali and Dale Vince, thanks for being part of our show tonight. Next week on Cross Question, we will be welcoming Ian Blackford, the former Westminster leader of the SNP, the musician Winston Marshall, who's a former member of the band Mumford & Sons, the Conservative MP Bim Afalami and the historian Dr Tessa Dunlop. Coming up in the next hour, though, we are going to turn our attention to school suspensions because more than 1 million days of learning were lost last year after record numbers of children were suspended from school. School suspensions have risen by a third compared with pre-pandemic levels, leading to fears of a deepening crisis post-pandemic. Why is this happening? Why are so many more school kids being suspended? And if you're a parent and you're suddenly told that your child is suspended, what do you do about it? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.